Welcome to the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand, a podcast for leading financial professionals, or rainmakers, and their teams that offer support for securing a successful future. From marketing help to staffing structure, listen and subscribe for actionable insights from advisors and skilled professionals alike.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand. I am your host today, Matt Seitz, Chief Marketing Officer here at C2P, and I'm joined by our Vice President of Marketing and Head of our Marketing Agency, Carrie Chadoff. Thanks for joining us, Carrie.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Yeah, for those tuning in today, we actually covered this topic on lead generation recently on our coffee break, and it's repurposed on our podcast if you want to check that out. And it really was a hot topic that was brought up by many of our advisors that had asked us to cover this in a coffee break of the declining numbers right now, kind of across the board of different lead generation strategies. And so we covered a wide spectrum of those of what's working, what's not, how can we adjust as the industry is changing in general right now. And there was so much to cover. We had so much great content. We said we could do this again. And so here we are back already, kind of with part 2 of that discussion on lead generation. But before we kind of get into the second half of all that great content, I know, Carrie, you and your team have kind of gathered for us that you're repurposing for them today. I think it would be helpful to kind of go back and summarize some of the key points of that discussion, especially as it came to how advisors and business owners should be looking at lead generation right now, and maybe helping with that frame of reference of not all lead generation is created equal, and how they might want to be segmenting that to help with expectations moving forward.
Yeah, Matt, as we know, many advisors out there think of a lead of someone that's going to immediately convert into a right fit call, a discovery call, and in 2 weeks will move, $1 million over to their business. Well, that's just not the way this industry works. Very few industries work. So what we talked about in our last episode are different tactics are throughout a life cycle, life engagement of a prospect shopping and potentially moving their assets to a financial advisor. Much like the bucket plan written by Jason L. Smith, he has a 3-bucket approach. One is the now bucket, there's a soon bucket, and a later bucket. I view that very similarly in the marketing terms. The now bucket are people that have a high level of engagement with you. Those may be live events. They may be a client referral. They may be a client appreciation. I do want to note that clients should be viewed as a lead generation. And why is that? Because not only are they family and friends, but unless you are guaranteed and with 100% certainty that you have 100% share of wallet, they are a lead. In fact, to me, they are the best type of leads because you can increase your relationship with them. So those are very high level of engagement, and those are generally what we consider the now bucket. The soon, and you can define those, whether that means it's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, are things that you are offering a prospect that has a higher level of engagement, but not necessarily in person. So those may be a webinar. It may be an ebook that you wrote. It could be a newsletter. It could be a podcast. And an interesting thing about a podcast and many of these things, they may fall into more than one bucket, and I'll cover that in a second. And the longer term bucket of marketing is considered the later bucket. And those may be things that people have seen you and found your website through search engine optimization. It may be a PR release because your firm recently won an award, or one of your advisors won a particular recognition. Those are quick reads, maybe invested someone 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Those are later, but they're really set the stage for someone to move from the later to the soon to the now. It is very rare on your first engagement, somebody is going to meet you at a live event and all of a sudden, be the right fit for who you're searching for.
All right.
I talked about some of these tactics can be in more than one bucket. A podcast, if I listen to one podcast, that may be a later bucket. If I'm a regular subscriber and I listen to you each week, each month, I catch 4 out of 5 of those podcasts, I have a vested interest. I've invested my time. I find what you have to say being valuable. I consider that a soon bucket. So again, you've got those tactics that are ready almost now, high level of engagement and in person. That's the now bucket. Soon is someone's had some level of engagement. And then you have later, which is really just getting the pipeline ready.
Great. And I think what was helpful, thank you for laying that, especially making that tie back to the bucket plan, how they're so similar for those, familiar with our processes here. But is the quick recap of how we made the alignment too, of just how an advisor has that holistic financial plan for their prospects and clients they're working with. You and your team are working with our advisors to build that holistic marketing plan that takes those strategies and tactics from the three different buckets there so that advisors have consistent lead generation from the now all the way through the later bucket. So I think that helps, and that kind of segued into the questions for today's podcast as we're diving in of whether advisors are seeing very high, very low results from those different strategies right now based on what's going on. We are seeing them dip a little bit industry wide, and there's a lot of different things going on. The election this year, the way the markets have been, there's a lot of things going on, but everyone's in the same space. And so we were getting to, how do you break through the clutter and differentiate from the other advisors? It's a crowded space right now. I mean, everyone has now figured out how to do webinars. There's many that are back to doing the workshops. So how do they take the messaging and differentiate themselves from the other advisors out there? And I think that's really where you and your team wanted to share those tips for our audience on how to take what they have and stand out in a crowded market.
Matt, if I were to ask advisors around the country to describe their target audience, I would hear someone say $500,000 in investable assets, pre-retirees or those in retirement. I suspect there isn't an advisor in the country that would say, no, I don't want someone like that. That's therefore the challenge that advisors are facing. Everyone is going after the same people. Having said that, I think there are two critical ways to break through the clutter. One is targeting a niche. Do not try to be all things to all people. And the easiest way that I can identify if you have a niche or not is I'm going to go on your website. And if you focus on those that are federal employees or teachers or military or pharmaceutical or business owners, your website needs to speak to them. And that is something that I rarely see. And it's really a true way to break through the clutter. The second is offering a unique message to break through the clutter. There's too many messages going on out there. Simply go into Facebook and search up webinars or Google webinars, financial services, and you'll hear webinar after webinar about Social Security and when to take Social Security. Now, I do believe that everyone may have their slightly small twist, but to the average consumer, that is a solution. That is a problem of when to take Social Security. But the real true differentiator in the content that's being delivered isn't truly differentiated. There's very few webinars out there that are breaking through the clutter. So make sure your message is centered around what is the true problem versus what your solution you have to offer.
Yeah, and I think we do see a lot, because I think advisors and business owners in general, I don't think our industry is unique to it, is you never want to turn people away. And that's why it can get scary to go down the niche route. But I mean, we've all heard it out there. The riches are in the niches, and it can be hard to only focus on the small segment. But I think if you talk to any advisors or business owners out there, that'll tell you when they finally decided to do that is when they saw their business go to the next level. And it doesn't mean that you can't work with those outside of that bubble, but making that your focus, and especially, I think that's really what you're getting at, right?
Absolutely. I think the more targeted you are, and it could be working with women in transition, it could be widowers and, dentists, you're going to gain a reputation that will allow your marketing to become that much more effective. So if I'm a petroleum executive, and yes, it can get down to petroleum executives, we have some of those, and they understand my industry. They understand whether there's a pension. They understand, what type of stock options I may have. That is very unique. And if someone said, I have solutions, and they're not just generic that they apply to every executive, but I really understand this industry, who is that prospect going to call first? I think it's pretty evident that if you can demonstrate that you have expertise with a specific target, that target is going to resonate with you exponentially more Therefore, the power of your marketing is your ROI will go up without a doubt.
Right. And so now let's say the advisors got their niche or they're working on that. They're creating that content. I mean, we've told advisors, even if they don't realize it, they are content factories with the amount of knowledge up in their head. It's just sometimes we got to pull it out of there from the workshops, the interviews, things they do. Sometimes you just got to record yourself going on theirs. But how can they leverage that stream of content, everything they have there, towards their lead generation efforts?
Yeah, and I liked how you asked that question, Matt. Is all the advisors out there certainly have a lot of knowledge in their head, and make sure you're offering something different, and please don't just rely on artificial intelligence AI to create your content. Why? Because it really lacks the personality. Make sure that you're offering something different, because if everyone answers the same way, how is a prospect, a consumer, expected to differentiate you from others? Really, the key is, and for those that are part of the C2P family and had an opportunity to go to our Mastermind Collegium in Pittsburgh, you heard Chuck from Red Flag Advantage really talk about focusing on pinpointing the problem. So if you start and hear a question and you immediately go to the solution, you've probably have already lost the individual because you're not personalizing. Understand what is the reason somebody's even in the room, pinpoint the problem, and understand the magnitude and calculate the impact of that problem. Then and only then do you start to present your solution. And then and only then do you start presenting how your solution is different from everyone else's. So again, stop leading with solutions when you don't really understand the problem. And even if someone claims this is their problem, I would challenge you to ask them more questions, peel back the onion, because the majority of advisors aren't really taking that time to understand truly what the problems are that they're trying to solve, but rather they're going straight to a solution. And therefore, you're almost becoming a commodity, and I'm comparing solutions versus this advisor really took the time to learn who I am, what my family situation is, and how important these solutions are to solving my problem. They went straight to solution, and they're feeling that maybe I'm just trying to sell them something. And that is the exact opposite feeling that you want a prospect to have.
Yeah, I mean, this industry in particular, I mean, it's all about you want to work with an advisor, a person that you know, like, and trust. It's hard to do that when, like you said, you get into the solutions and benefits listings and not, they understand what I'm going through. They understand who I am or where I need to get to or how I need to get there. So it's the behavioral side. So that being said, what tips do you have for our listeners on how maybe they can adjust their communications or what they could use in their communications to be more relatable and personable?
Messaging is key. You heard me talk about being different and understanding your target audience and breaking through the clutter. There is research out there that states subject lines that mention aspirational messages are opened at 38% higher level than those that are solution oriented. And why is because, again, if I get an email that says, do you need a fixed income annuity? My immediate answer may be no, and I don't answer that. If I get an email that talks about, are you worried about running out of money? Are you looking for additional income streams when you're in retirement? That to me is much more appealing as a consumer. Now you're starting to ask, is this the potential impacts of pinpointing the problem opposed to going immediately to solutions? Consider words like, how are you feeling? Are you tired of? Are you struggling with? Those are words that really understand the empathy for your target audience. We call making an emotional connection kind of the wow campaigns. When you get something, you're like, they spoke to me. Frankly, whether that's our industry or others, it can be any industry. Dove Soap has a tremendous marketing insights in terms of how they talk to women. And they could certainly talk about, is your skin dry? Are they tired? But they talk about in many cases, and I encourage all of our listeners to do a little bit of research on Dove. Dove has campaigns about making a woman feel beautiful. And and it comes in all shapes and sizes. And you'd say, why is a soap company doing that? Well, it's clearly it is understanding their audience and why they need to be clean and all that. Yes, Dove soap probably has all the solutions, but it is making people feel beautiful about themselves. And that's probably not what most of our audience would think about when it comes to soap. So no matter what you're doing, make that personal connection. The other thing that I would kind of say is once you've attracted an individual to kind of interact with, or you've identified a potential problem, offer a webinar that's 30 minutes or less. Individuals do not want to go to an hour and a half. They want to understand, yes, you understand my problem. How are you going to solve it? And why are you the right person to solve it? Those webinars that last 75 minutes, especially as an introductory, is really something that is more of a turnoff than a turn on.
Now, that last one especially, I think, is a really good point because we talk a lot about webinars here. We know for those that tune in frequently, we do a lot of webinars over at JL Smith for our lead generation. It's something we've struggled with because I know we've been shooting to get ours at 30 minutes or less for a while now. And it's hard I call it the curse of knowledge. Sometimes when you want to get everything out of your head as an advisor or even a marketer over an advisor, and you want to share this, we understand you, we know your problem, we can solve it. But to your point, Carrie, sometimes less is more. And just being able to show we understand the problem, we can solve it. Here's a little bit how, let's have a right fit call, or let's schedule that discovery meeting. And so I think there's a lot of power in that it might be a struggle to get those under 30, but to what you're saying, it sounds like those are way more effective the shorter the better.
You don't need to tell your audience, your prospect, every single thing that you know about said topic. Give them enough, intrigue them, and then finish it off when you have the follow-up meeting.
So those are a lot of great tips, a lot of digestible stuff there. Instead of waiting to use these, is there any way that maybe some of this could be used, the messaging could be used to be more proactive in their marketing?
I would say proactive, but I would also leverage your marketing further than most. So if you did a podcast, people say, well, I have a podcast. My question is, can you slice up that podcast? Is it on your website? Are you slicing that up and leveraging it on the same content on your blogs? Are you leveraging it on your social content? So make sure that you are repurposing your content. You're spending a lot of effort to produce your podcast or a blog. Make sure you're leveraging it through multiple channels and vehicles.
Great. Well, you mentioned podcasts there. I know we get a lot of questions on that. We've got, I think, more and more advisors, especially in our network, that are starting to get into those, either starting their own or getting out there and being guests on more podcasts. Have you seen companies that are using podcasts as a lead generation tool?
Yeah, it's really kind of increased. And I think podcasts probably came on strong during COVID over the last 5 years, especially
right.
As
that was the thing to do, right?
It was a way to talk to somebody, right? And so I think podcasts have grown exponentially. And frankly, as a personal consumer of podcasts, I tend to listen to podcasts a lot more in the car, driving, listening to them versus sitting home and watching a YouTube video with the same content. And again, I take the dog for a walk and I listen to podcasts. So podcasts have evolved, and it used to be, a company would strictly sponsor a podcast. And as things have evolved, now companies are putting on their own podcasts. Again, you don't want to give away the entire solution. You want to intrigue, you want to entice somebody of that was really interesting, that solved a potential problem I have, and I want to hear more. I want to learn more. So now I want to follow up. I want to go to their website. I want to follow up on their newsletter. I want to maybe directly call. The other thing is don't be afraid to ask for a sale per se. Is come to my website. Come to my website, sign up, call me at this said number. In fact, some podcasts that I listen to, and even in the financial sector, have maybe a 30-second commercial. And it could be in a different voice, could be in your own voice, but make sure that it's clearly differentiated from you and your guest talking about said topic. But run a commercial. if you ever consider running a 30-second radio ad, why wouldn't you run your 30-second radio ad on your own podcast? So certainly if you think podcasts or radio is one way to generate a lead and you're doing a podcast, that certainly is one way to generate a lead.
Yeah. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. So do you think that the content of the podcast, what impact does that have on the lead generation itself? Meaning kind of the makeup of it, the presentation, the information, the delivery, like does all of that play a large factor in how it's positioned for lead generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all want to gain value from listening to a podcast. You don't need to hear a sales pitch. You don't want to hear something that you can't be a better person in 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 15 minutes in terms of podcasts. Again, podcasts can go a little bit longer as long as it's engaging content. It's the webinar that I would really stick to 30 minutes. People are smart. They want value. Or they won't come back. They won't stay on your podcast. They won't listen to the follow-up podcasts. Your objective is to, every time you have the podcast, you want the same people listen to the podcast over and over, and then you want to attract more people. So that's how you're going to grow your audience. Don't think about, well, they heard one podcast and they're done. You're doing multiple podcasts for a reason. You should be adding value to your consumer each time. If we go back to the later bucket and someone listens to your podcast for the first time, and now they've listened to 5 of your podcasts and they come back every month, however often you do it, now they're in the soon bucket and they're ready, hopefully getting close to making a decision or contacting you. I would also tell you with the number of podcasts, make sure the quality is high. Use valuable clients, use guests, or you can use clients, make sure everything is compliant approved. But make them entertaining. At the end of the day, people want to do business with people they like. So you have to come off in these podcasts as approachable, likable, but be genuine. If you're funny, crack some jokes. If you're serious, don't try to crack jokes because that's not who you are. They would expect to meet with that individual they've heard for the last 3 months, 6 months, last year in that podcast. And if you're a different person, that obviously isn't who they are looking to do business with.
Great. And I'd be remiss, since we're talking about using these to plug other podcasts, if you are listening and you are thinking about starting one, you're not, C2P, we do have an episode with myself and Dave Allison where we go into detail of kind of the ABCs of starting your own, the softwares, the tools, the microphone, the cameras. So please check that out. We have a lot of great free resources for you. Speaking of that, Carrie, what podcast would you say in this industry specifically? Because I think that's what advisors are curious of. So in the financial realm, who's doing it right at this point?
I will give a shameless plug for, C2P and podcasts like this, where you have a regular podcast that it's ongoing, it's repeatable. People know when new episodes are coming out on, and generally these topics on coffee breaks and Rainmaker Multiplier are things that we're hearing from advisors. So they're very topical. And when you think about topical, Dave Allison of Allison Wealth does an outstanding job of podcasts. Literally every Friday, him and his team produce a new podcast. And those podcast topics are based on actual conversations they've had with their clientele the week prior. So it's really fairly unscripted, but they know it's timely. And that is so important when we talk about timely. If you're going to talk about something, if you're into football, wouldn't you want to listen to a podcast of injuries from the last week opposed to 2 years ago? What did Adrian Peterson do for, Minnesota? Well, that's not timely anymore. So again, the more timely, the immediate, and things that are truly relatable are the success of what I've seen Allison Wealth do with their podcasts.
Yeah. And it makes sense. And I like, how you kind of kick this off and talk about there, even with podcasts, depending on how you're using them and the content in them and the recency, whether that's a soon or a later bucket initiative there. Shifting gears a little bit back to we'll call it the now bucket of lead generation. You mentioned earlier, a lot of advisors doing workshops, webinars, and had a lot of success with those maybe in the past. Now, we know the numbers are on a little bit of a decline, but that's where that messaging you mentioned earlier can help with those. The main problem there has been obviously low registrations equals lower attendance, and that's going to hurt the numbers. What's the solution to that? What are there alternatives out there to the whole low registration equals low attendance issue that so many are facing right
Well,
now?
let's bring this back to the bucket plan marketing approach. I don't want people thinking just because someone did not attend my webinar, that means the lead isn't as valuable. Absolutely, I want to tell you that there's an opportunity to nurture these leads better. So when you talk about low registrants, low attendees, there are all still people that had actually registered, but they didn't attend. And there are absolutely people that attended that didn't lead to a meeting. So my challenge to the listeners is, what are you doing about that audience? So you have to be smarter. Things aren't just falling in your lap. As Matt said at the beginning, leads are down for a number of reasons. One is the market is becoming saturated with the same messages, which is why we really talked about understand your audience and your message. But the other thing is the market in general has been pretty positive. So when in general people are getting returns that are satisfactory to them, they aren't as in a hurry to move. So you have to nurture these leads. So understand, what does lower registration mean to lower attendance? Does that mean your marketing is as effective? I would argue, depending on what bucket you're looking at, you may not have as many in the now bucket, but let's start filling the soon bucket, and let's proactively submit and share your newsletters, your podcasts, which we just spoke about, ebooks, invite them to the next webinar. Don't just sit back and say, I only had 4 people, 5 people, 10 people attend. This was not successful. I want to challenge your thinking when you go back to, well, maybe they're in the later bucket. So how do you get them to move to the soon bucket, to the now bucket?
And you've already paid for those leads. You've already paid the cost to have them registered. Don't let them off the hook, just nurture them other ways. So I agree with that. And I guess a lot of advisors too, they're using, we have several partners out there, including our team, our agency team that is helping advisors on the lead generation side. A lot have relied on the webinars and the workshops, but I know your team for us at JL Smith has done a couple campaigns for us, as well as a couple of advisors on the Facebook Insta forums. Could you share a little bit about how that works and how that is a nice alternative too when you're trying to fill up, especially that soon and later bucket?
Yeah, Facebook has a campaign called Instant Forums. And what that is, it allows a visitor or reader or user of Facebook to see your digital ad. And it could be a static ad, it could be a video ad. You can use either. And if you are offering them perhaps an immediate download of a webinar or an ebook, for them to fill out a very short form, quote, instant form, that really just requires a first name, last name, and an email, maybe a phone number if you require, and to receive the content immediately. That is different from a traditional campaign where you'll run an ad and then you take them to a landing page. So now there's an extra step. So if you're really looking to get the later and soon buckets, I would consider a Facebook campaign. And certainly C2P's agency has a lot of experience, and we've run those for a lot of different of our advisors on various topics. So again, what are you looking for? Now, we go back to the soon and later bucket, and I said that's a little bit less of engagement. Absolutely. That's why they are in the soon and later. If you want somebody that's in the now bucket, well, then take them off site and understand the more your level of engagement, generally speaking, the lower your conversion or your response rate is going to be. So understand, what is your objective, and why would you want to run a Facebook traditional ad that takes someone to a landing page relative to an instant form? Different objectives, both very productive, and both tactics that we've used successfully with various advisors.
Great. Thank you. And I know somewhat related to this, the other question we've gotten a lot, both here, and I know Carrie, we both worked together previously before coming here to C2P. Everyone at some point always asks, what are the no-cost options? And I know you've got strong feelings on this. So do you mind sharing your thoughts on what are the no-cost options that are out there?
Well, the no cost is doing nothing. So that doesn't cost you anything. Now, one may argue that, or talk about search engine optimization, and it doesn't cost me anything to change my ad copy to use keywords. I would challenge you, there's always an opportunity cost. So if you feel, well, I'm writing a blog that doesn't cost any money, I'm going to post it on social and that doesn't cost me any money, you are probably accurate. Having said that, is what is your time worth? Okay. So there is always an opportunity. If I wasn't writing this blog, could I be following up with a prospect? Could I have another right fit call? Could I be attending a local chamber of commerce and networking? There's always going to be an opportunity cost. Do what you love and do what you're good at. So if you're really good and you're passionate about writing and doing writing your podcast scripts, then do that and you get great satisfaction. If not, leverage experts that can save you time. Again, so there are no cost options, and that is doing nothing. Otherwise, there is always a cost of doing any action.
Yeah. And I know, Carrie, we were talking even before this when we were kind of brainstorming is, like you said, it's the cost of not doing anything. I know we've shared before from JL Smith's perspective, when we went into the pandemic, there were a lot of advisors, a lot of you listening today that said, I'm just going to, sit on my hands and wait this out. And that was one strategy. We at JL Smith and Jason, we decided we're going to spend when everybody else isn't. And we found a way to grow during a time when everyone else was taking a step back. And sometimes that's the cost that's not looked at, is the cost of doing nothing when you're taking a step back when everyone else is taking a step forward. And we've been very transparent at JL Smith in our C2P events, our webinars and collegiums here of our spend. We spend a lot on marketing, but we carefully track our results and our ROI. So when we spend a lot, but we can show a 4 times to 6 times ROI on some of these campaigns, we know that we're moving the needle. And I think that comes back to where you started with this, of the kind of the holistic marketing plan of, if nothing else is kind of come across today, it's make sure that you're setting and sticking to that plan, whichever bucket those marketing strategies are coming from, because that's when you're staying the course, tracking your results and moving the needle forward.
Yeah, Matt, you touched on something that's critically important that is often forgotten, is tracking. And so understand your prospects and how many emails have they opened, and have they subscribed to your newsletters, and have they submitted questions to you, and they've gone to events, and understand the level of engagement. Again, higher level of engagement generally means they're closer to converting or making a decision to move from where they are to hopefully you. And if you don't have an understanding of these individuals have commented on a blog or viewed a post or gone to my website, you're missing a critical component. So I hope that everybody listening has, more leads than they know what to do with. But what I want to talk about is really the engagement model or propensity model, and who are you really targeting? And out of those, are you inviting those top tier individuals to your prospect events and prospect webinars, or are you considering all prospects equal? And so whether they are in the later, soon, or now bucket, they're all getting the same communication. I think that's a mistake. It's also a great mistake because you don't know what's working. And you really have to understand from an attribution perspective, how many people opened, what was the touch point, and what should you be doing more of or stop doing.
Right. That makes sense. Carrie, as we're kind of landing the plane here, any final tips or thoughts that you want to leave our audience with today?
I think the focus of understanding what is a lead across the board and how to nurture those leads and develop a lead from a later to soon to now to, frankly, even if you're in a now and they're already a client, I want you to think about, how do I increase the share of wallet from them, right? And then even if you have 100% share of wallet, I want you to think, how do I generate more referrals out of them? So I always want you to think about the next step in the sales process or buyer's journey. Each of them have unique approaches and different messages. So don't treat all leads as the same.
Carrie, thank you very much again for returning for part 2 of this discussion. Appreciate your insight.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, if you did not check out part 1, please go to our podcast page on our website. You can see part 1 of that discussion on lead generation strategies. There's also, I know we talked a lot about, obviously, lead generation and prospecting. We have a guide on our website, prospecting tips. You can find that on C2P But at that, thank you all for tuning in today and have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Never miss an episode by subscribing now to discover new resources and strategies. Visit C2PEnterprises.com to learn how we can help scale and secure your business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.